Believe me, it's really not that difficult. Now, there are some kinds of flooring that you can lay directly on the concrete floor in your basement, provided that you don't have any water problems and that the floor itself is in really good condition. You can usually put a ceramic tile, some kinds of resilient tile, and indoor-outdoor carpeting. However, if you want to use anything other than that, like hardwood floors, regular carpeting, or vinyl flooring, you'll need to build the floor up, basically make a new subfloor. Now, again, it's not as difficult as it sounds. The other advantage to that is that it's a much more comfortable floor for kids to play on or for walking on. The concrete, obviously, is very damp and hard, so you want to make sure you get up off of there. So that's what I'm doing. But before I continue, let me tell you what you're going to need to do this project. You'll need 2x4 or 2x6 lumber, plastic sheeting, a power nailer, 3/4 inch plywood, a pencil, a tape measure, a hammer, concrete nails, a 4-foot level, a cordless drill, and screws. Now, the first step is to make sure that you've sealed the floor with a good waterproof or sealer. Then, even though you don't anticipate any water problems, there still may be some condensation because the basement tends to be damp anyway. So you want to make sure you put down a vapor barrier. There's lots of different ways to do it. I've just chosen to put down some 6 mil plastic. You can also use building paper and some other methods, and it also depends on what you're going to be using as your flooring surface. If you're going to use hardwood flooring, you need to be very, very careful about your vapor barrier because that has a greater tendency to be affected by moisture. And once I've got the vapor barrier down, I've laid down these pieces of lumber here. In this case, they're 2x6s, and these are what you call sleepers. Now, they're called sleepers because they're laying down, sleeping, laying down. Well, anyway, I thought it was funny. But you put the sleepers down, and they don't have to be any particular lumber. These are 2x6s. You could use 2x4s or 2x10s even. I just had these left over from a deck project. Now, also, if you have to use several pieces to make up one length, don't worry that they're all the same size as far as the width in this case, but you do need to make sure that they're the same height so that when you put your plywood down on top, you won't have any problems there. Now, I've lined these up on 16-inch centers, the same way I would as if I was putting in a regular subfloor. Now, instead of just using a tape measure, which you can certainly do, in order to measure out from the wall and get your center lines for each sleeper, I decided to go ahead and make what's called a story pole, which is this piece of wood right here. And what I've done is marked for the widths of each one of my sleepers to put them on 16-inch centers from one wall. So then all I have to do is put my story pole up against the wall and then line my sleepers up based upon my markings on the story pole. Now, this is also going to come in handy later on when I put the plywood down because I'll know where to nail based upon the marks on my story pole. Plus, it makes it easier than a tape measure if you're working by yourself. Now, you've got all your sleepers in place and everything's in good shape. You also may need to have a level, as I said, because if you have a slight slope, it's okay, but you want to start from one end to the other and just check for level, and you may have to do a little bit of shimming here and there, but it's really not that tough. Now, the next step is actually going to be fastening down the sleepers to the concrete floor, which really isn't that hard either. Now, there's a couple of ways you can go here. First, you can use a case-hardened concrete nail and a hammer. Now, it may take you a little time to get the hang of that, but again, it's not too hard. Now, what I'm going to use is something a little bit more powerful. This is called a power nailer. And what it does is actually uses a charge. It's a .22 caliber blank. And it, for all intents and purposes, is a firearm. And what it does is fires the nail high velocity down through the wood into the concrete subfloor. You just load the nail in the cartridge and then you can go. Now, safety is very, very important here. You want to make sure that you have safety goggles, not just for you, for anybody around you, and ear protection because this is loud. You also want to make sure that people in the area know that you're getting ready to discharge the tool. Now, you need to make sure that your work surface is clean and free from any obstacles. Then you're going to use a hammer to discharge the tool. All you have to do is hit it right on top. Now, it's going to be loud. Fire in the hole, technical term. There, that worked pretty good. You can see put it right through into the concrete. And that's pretty much the easiest way to do that. Again, be very careful. Now all you have to do is continue nailing every 2 feet or so along your sleepers. Then you'll be ready to put on your plywood subfloor. Now before I put the plywood down, you can see that I'm putting down some construction adhesive. This is going to help me get a good bond between the plywood and the sleepers, and it's not a bad idea. Now I've pre-cut all of the plywood that I'm going to use, and I'm using 3/4 inch plywood. Now, I went ahead and laid it all in place to make sure that it fit properly, so I know this is going to fit. You set it in place and let it fall right down on top of the adhesive. Now one thing to remember is that you should leave a little bit of a joint or gap in between your plywood. That way, since there is going to be some humidity down here in the basement, you can account for a little bit of expansion and contraction. Now the next step is to fasten it down to the sleepers. Now this is where your story pole comes in handy again. As I said before, since I can't see my sleepers now, instead of having to get the tape measure out and measure each time, I can just keep the story pole with me, and now I know that I've got a sleeper right here, and so on. So I know right where to fasten the plywood. Now, you can either screw or nail the plywood down, and I'm going to put screws in because I think that holds a little bit better. Now, the rule of thumb generally is to put a screw every 6 inches or so around the perimeter of your plywood, and then in the center parts, you really only need one every foot or so. There. This is a lot better than walking on that hard concrete floor. Now at this point, your finished floor covering can be whatever you want. Hardwood flooring, vinyl, or carpet like I'm using. Now carpet requires some special techniques and tools, well, let me give you your checklist for that project. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you. I'll save that for another show.